There's a strange kind of loneliness that can happen when you begin healing, not because people disappear overnight, but because something inside of you changes quietly. You stop apologizing so much. You stop over explaining. You stop chasing. You stop shrinking yourself just to make other people comfortable. And suddenly, conversations feel different. Relationships feel different. Even rooms feel different. The version of you that once kept the peace at all costs isn't leading anymore. And while growth can feel empowering, it can also feel heartbreaking. Because sometimes the people who love the old version of you struggle to understand the new one. Everybody, welcome back to the Soul Talk podcast, where we have conversations on mind, body, movement, spirit, healing, and becoming who you truly are. I'm Marybeth Hrim. I'm a mental health therapist. I'm a coach, a runner, and someone who deeply believes that healing isn't just something we think about. It's something we live. And sometimes living forward means realizing that growth changes relationships, not because you're becoming selfish, not because you've stopped caring, but because you're finally learning how to stay connected without abandoning yourself. And before we dive in today, if these conversations support you in any way, I'd love to invite you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and become part of this growing community. And if your nervous system has been carrying stress, overwhelm, emotional exhaustion, or simply the weight of constantly holding everything together, I also invite you to check out my 7-day nervous system reset, which is available as a deep guided experience to help you reconnect to yourself gently and intentionally. So let's go ahead and get started with the conversation today. The unspoken part of healing, I think one of the hardest truths about growth is realizing that not everyone benefits from your healing. And that can be incredibly painful to admit because many of us were taught that if we become healthier, everything around us would automatically improve. But sometimes healing exposes dynamics that were quietly built around your self abandonment. Maybe you were the peacekeeper, the fixer, the emotional caretaker, the one who absorbed tension, the one who stayed quiet, the one who overgave, the one who kept relationships functioning. And then one day, you begin changing. You start listening to your body. You start paying attention to your exhaustion. You begin noticing how often you override your own needs. And suddenly, the relationship dynamics shift, not because you became difficult, but because you stopped disappearing. I think many of us don't realize how much of our identity becomes wrapped up in being needed, especially for women, especially caregivers, especially people who learned early in life that love was connected to performance, responsibility, or emotional management. So for years, you may have believed if everyone around me is okay, then I'm okay. But healing starts asking different questions. What about you? What happens when you stop managing everyone else's emotions? What happens when you no longer want relationships built solely around obligation? And what happens when your nervous system can no longer tolerate constant emotional chaos? That's when things get uncomfortable because growth changes what your body is willing to carry. So let's talk a little bit about grief. So the grief that nobody talks about, and I think that this is the part nobody prepares us for. Because sometimes growth comes with grief. Not always because people leave, but because the dynamics change. You begin realizing some people only knew the version of you that overfunctioned. And that's what they wanted. And some relationships were built around your silence. Some connections depended on you staying small. And when you begin showing up differently, people notice. Sometimes subtly, sometimes immediately, because you may hear things like, gee, you've changed. You used to be easier. Why are you so distant? You're different now. And honestly, you are different. Not better than anyone else, not above anyone else, just more aware, more honest, more grounded, more connected to yourself. And to be honest, that can feel threatening to people who are comfortable with the old version of you. See, healing is not rejection. One of the biggest misunderstandings around boundaries and growth is that people interpret them as rejection. But boundaries aren't they're not punishment. They're clarity. They're honesty. They're the nervous system finally saying, I can't keep surviving this way. And sometimes people struggle when you stop extending yourself. Not because you're wrong, but because the dynamic benefited them. And that realization can feel deeply painful. Because many of us genuinely love the people we're struggling with. And healing doesn't mean you stop loving people. Sometimes it simply means you stop abandoning yourself to maintain connection. And the loneliness of becoming, I think there's also a season during healing where life feels strangely quiet. You're not fully who you used to be, but you're still becoming who you are. And that between space can feel lonely because old patterns no longer fit. But new relationships, new ways of relating, new ways of being haven't fully formed yet. And this is where people panic because they go back to the old versions of themselves, because the discomfort of becoming feels too uncertain. But I want to say this gently. Do not confuse unfamiliar with failure. Sometimes your nervous system experiences peace as loneliness simply because chaos was familiar. Let that sink in for a second. Is sometimes calm feels empty because survival was loud. And then there's relationships that grow with you. But here's the beautiful part. Not every relationship falls apart when you grow. Some deepen. Some become more honest, more mutual, more emotionally safe. The healthiest relationships are not the ones where you disappear to keep connection. They're the ones where you can finally exhale, where you can say, this is who I am, and the love remains. Maybe differently, maybe more honestly, but authentically. And that's what authentic is. And honestly, these relationships are worth waiting for. You know, I I think movement teaches us this too. When we physically grow stronger, our body changes, which it can tolerate. This is true emotionally. When your emotional strength grows, your soul changes. It changes what it carries. You begin noticing when you tense, where you perform, where you override discomfort, where you betray yourself for approval. Healing is not becoming hard. It's becoming honest. I want to leave you with this. If you're in a season where your relationships feel different because you're changing, I want you to know this. Growth can feel lonely before it feels freeing. And sometimes becoming yourself means grieving versions of connection that required you to abandon who you truly are. But the goal was never to lose yourself, just to stay loved. The goal was always to come home to yourself and trust that the right relationships, the healthy relationships, the emotionally safe relationships will meet you there. I want to thank you so much for being here with me today on the Soul Talk podcast. And if this conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to subscribe to my YouTube channel and share this episode with someone who may need it and continue walking through this work with me together. And if your body and nervous system are asking for deeper support right now, check out my 7-day nervous system reset. It's available to guide you gently back into regulation, grounding, and connection. And you can find that in the description of my YouTube channel, or you can just simply send me a message and I'll send you the link. So keep moving forward, not perfectly, not all at once, but honestly. Until next time, I'm Marybeth Hrim.